Today, I'd like to welcome a new sponsor of the podcast, the Media Insider. A lot of small businesses are attempting to be successful without a clear communication strategy. The Media Insider helps small businesses and entrepreneurs build powerful, professional brand and communication strategies without the big agency price tag. From messaging to media visibility, they give you the insider tools and step-by-step guidance you need to stand out, connect with your audience, and grow your business with confidence. Ready to look like the pro you already are? Visit themediainsider.co and start building a brand as well as communicate successfully to your perfect audience. The Media Insider, where big ideas don't need big budgets. What if real estate wasn't just about transactions, but transformation? What if the way we buy, sell, and steward land was less about square footage and more about soil health, community connection, spirit, and story? Today's guests, Alissa and Neal Collins, are doing just that. As co-founders of Latitude Regenerative Real Estate, they specialize in life-giving, ecologically rich properties that challenge the conventional real estate model. Think permaculture compounds, forest farms, land trust models, biophilic design, and homes built with both community and the cosmos in mind. They didn't just choose Whidbey Island, they're investing in its future. From their own biodynamic homestead to local projects, Alissa and Neal are helping reimagine what it means to live well, live lightly, and live with intention. They also co-host the Regenerative Real Estate podcast, where they explore regenerative ideas, interview fellow trailblazers, and ask big questions about home, belonging, and place. One of the areas that really stood out to me in this conversation was the modality biophilic design. The concept includes making your home sustainable, and all the things to do that are available to you right now. However, as you listen to them iterate how they have planned their life to be totally invested in community, the most important part of biophilic design is the community component. It is subjective because it's how we are and how we behave and how we choose to be. What kind of neighbor would you like to be? Have you ever been in a situation where it wasn't necessarily your family, but you were in your neighborhood and things were going really well? Like, what were those elements that made for a good neighborhood? And then what were those things that didn't? How did you bring that into your neighborhood to be neighborly at a very minimum? In my opinion, this is what is lacking to me in much of our country. We can make sure our homes are as sustainable as possible, but ask yourself, what are you here for? Do you want to be cared for? Do you want to be worth the trouble? If so, create a community that knows you want the same for them. Let's dive into the vision, values, and adventures of this dynamic duo and why Whidbey Island is such a perfect backdrop for their work. Hello, Alissa and Neal. Thank you for being on my podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to be here.
I am excited too. I am in their backyard on a patio, just in case you want to picture it. And it's beautiful in the woods, down in Langley's. Is this the neighborhood water silo?
It is.
Okay.
We're at the top of the Maxwellton watershed.
Oh.
This is where the water gets pumped up and then streams down into our neighbor's home.
Wow. Okay. And then she has beautiful dahlias and gardens. And what other things do you grow out here?
I grow strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, currant, squash, beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants. I've got a bunch of marigolds right now, some roses, and a cover crop in, and waiting patiently for the grapes to come in, as well as the hardy kiwis. We just got a new 2,500 square foot growing zone.
Wow.
Everything's really young right now.
Yeah.
We've got a young orchard.
But still, it's so satisfying to eat your own food, right?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, there's nothing that can compare.
No, not at all. Not. So tell the listener how you two met.
Neal and I met in graduate school in a little village in Vermont called Brattleboro, and we went to the SIT Graduate Institute. and we had all the same classes. We were group project mates together and really had a chance to explore the world by going to Bangladesh on a field course studying poverty alleviation, which is kind of where our relationship really started to deepen. So we had from Brattleboro to Bangladesh and then back to Brattleboro, and life took off from there.
And is that your story too?
I couldn't help but notice that girl down the hall that was in all my classes.
Yes.
And I wanted to go explore New England, coming out of the South, and she just happened to be the cool girl with the car and was down for adventures. And the same with Bangladesh, that she wanted to go out and venture into a city that can be kind of abrasive for not a lot of tourists there. And so we got to work and play together as classmates and then as workmates, and our relationship kind of flourished from there. And we've been working together and playing together and now parenting together
Ever since.
for 15 years now.
So let's get to the regenerative part of this story, the regenerative real estate. I'd never heard of that before, that specific description. So how did you arrive at the idea of this?
I'll start, I think Alissa and I both come at life of really wanting to embed ourselves within community. I came out of kind of climate catastrophe out of Louisiana with Hurricane Katrina, and Alissa out of Alaska. So the environment was very much in our kind of focus of what we wanted to do. But we spent a number of years overseas in India and the Maldives, working really at the grassroots level of community development and organizing. In the Maldives, it was doing climate change adaptation work. And so we're living on a local island with fishermen with 130 people. And we're having to come up against, or not come up against, but work with these 5-star luxury resort operators. And if that doesn't really show you the juxtaposition of how communities interact with the built environment and with the powers that be. And that was the kind of initial seed of maybe we should go into real estate as a way in which it is the common ground that brings community together.
Okay.
It's the intersection between the economy, how we live, public health, so many different factors. And I think we're looking for this new approach that wasn't necessarily nonprofit.
Right.
So we came back to the States. I dove in head first. Alyssa was a little bit more reluctant. But we started going down the academic route of master's program in commercial real estate development. That put me on a team that was building out the Vancouver waterfront project in Washington. So just big, mixed-use, multi-million-dollar projects and buildings.
Down in Vancouver, Washington, before the border of Portland.
Yep. And then we started to want something a little bit more human scale of how can we touch these buildings and how do we make it relatable and accessible for somebody like us that wanted to do projects. We wanted to breathe life into old buildings and things like that. And so we built up a small portfolio of residential multifamily properties. We're ambitious. We launched some big third-party vendor services companies like property management and brokerage. And it really came to a point where on paper, everything looked like a success. The companies were growing and we're starting to build out the organizational chart with the employees and things like that. But it really came to a point where my parents, or my dad in particular, came down with very aggressive cancer. Her mom came down with terminal melanoma cancer. Her dad had throat cancer. His partner came down with ALS. And it felt like it was just in this really short time frame. Looking back, it was about 12 months where it was just one bad news after the next. And whenever you're trying to make sense in that maelstrom of a storm, what we really came to an understanding is that you can take the best medicine that the West or the East has to offer, but if you're not doing it in community, then you might as well be doing nothing at all.
Right.
And that was a really interesting time whenever we really started to incorporate community as medicine.
Is it because in this trial, and when this was going on, and the trials and tribulations of things that happened, did you feel alone in it?
Yeah, felt alone, but also really trying to seek answers, even though perhaps there was never really an answer. But the threads that started to emerge as we were going deep into, for example, family history, was my grandfather was a farmer in South Dakota with a large 1,500-acre farm. he, when the Green Revolution started knocking at his door, he said yes. And so he began applying chemicals onto the land. And not soon thereafter, my grandmother became sick.
Wow.
And she died of cancer the year I was born. And I think that was part of an epigenetic change that occurred in the family. So I really started going into the health and wellness element of home and land, and how much we've been spraying chemicals in our farms and our fields throughout the United States and, of course, globally for a really long time now. So I was deeply disturbed and distressed by it. And again, in seeking those answers, I became pretty convinced that was a big element of the story. And, and it wasn't translating into our real estate work. So as Neal was sharing, we had built a property management company, and we had built a brokerage. And I didn't feel like, and I know together, we didn't feel like any of our values were present in our business. We might have had 5-star customer service experience. We might know how to articulate our value proposition, and clients will come in the front door and be pleased, but we didn't have any give back programs. We were we were young, and we were getting initiated into business ownership. So that in and of itself was a journey too. But it was through these diagnoses, and also through just a love of land in place that was really very alive in me, with growing plants and wanting to grow some food and make sure that I knew where my food was coming from. Then it was a deep dive into our food miles. Where do our farmers live? We had a young child at the time. What was his experience going to be living at this home in Portland, Oregon? And how is it in relationship with the farmers in the surrounding community? Oh, and how can our business support that? And that's kind of how regenerative real estate was born. It was a day we were driving out the Columbia River Gorge. You were saying, I want to start a podcast to explore regeneration in real estate, because if agriculture is doing it, and regenerative agriculture is the solution to the climate chaos that we're in, to the cancer epidemic that we're in, to our disconnect, becoming reconnected, it's well, if agriculture can do it, we know real estate can do it. So that's how it came to be.
And for folks that aren't familiar with the regenerative movement, what is going on within the agricultural context? Is it saying, how do we create whole, thriving ecosystems and make a positive impact rather than a negative impact with our practices? And if we can't port that same philosophy of how to make a positive impact and create a healthy homes and healthy communities into our own built environment, then we're just not thinking deep enough, because that's really the environment that we wanted to raise our child and the community that we wanted to live in. And so really over the past 6 or 7 years, it's just been an inquiry into what is a regenerative approach to real estate, and who's practicing it, and how do we start incorporating the best practices to really embed health and well-being, sustainability, community, ecology, and spirit into our homes and communities.
So you're digging into that. You're going down that path. So what brought you to Whidbey Island?
It's such a fun story. So Neal and I, as life partners who had worked together, fallen in love, raising a child, we always had a way to come back to vision for our future, because we knew that if we didn't do that we would just be rudderless, feeling our way kind of like an amoeba, out in the world. So we drew pictures one day of the life that we wanted to live. And we compared each other's pictures after we were done, and we had very similar elements. I would say it was 90% on mountain, ocean, crops, fields, children, animals, small, basically where we are today is a manifestation of that. And
we had been living in Portland for a number of years, and we started to really tune into an architect named Ross Chapin, who lives on the island. And Ross's whole way of approaching the world was, how do you design for community? What are the actual patterns that create spontaneous interaction from neighbors? And so we started to essentially pilgrimage up here. And we were actually staying with a family that lived next to the Whidbey Institute, and got guided through the woods by a 6-year-old girl that took us on a very long tour that ended up, these small narrow trails open up onto this canopy, or this cathedral-like setting with the beautiful wooden organic school in the middle. And we just we saw that it was a Waldorf school, and that was the school pedagogy that we had put our son in Portland. And it was funny because we came back later that day and Ross asked us, where'd you go? Well, we found this school in the woods. Do you know it? Of course I know it. I designed it.
Oh, wow.
And so Ross and his wife, Deborah, are just amazing stewards and kind of elders of the community. And they called us a couple weeks later and said, look, we've got this house that's come up available that hasn't been on the market for 12 years. And it's the perfect size for a 3-person family. And we'd love to get more young folks on the island. And he said, why don't you guys think about it? And I think it took us all of about 8 hours of deliberating before we said, you know what, it's 2021, it's deep pandemic in Portland. Yeah. This is the portal that I think the universe is opening up. And so we stuck the for sale sign in the front yard and took the leap, and here we are.
There's one thing, though, that is really fun about the story that precedes knowing Ross, which, we've talked about food. We love food. Right. So as we were going in this regenerative inquiry in Portland, knowing that things were just not feeling right, we had a dinner with 30 of our closest real estate colleagues, and the theme of the dinner was a sustainable future is a flavorful future. And we had a generative conversation that night about what could be in the industry, but we had invited people that we didn't know. And Neal, who is a master of invitations in some ways, he had written this letter to Ross, and it was both digital and physical. And Ross received the letter, and he happened to be speaking at a conference in Portland called Live Large, Build Small. And he joined us that night and kind of became the guest of honor. And the mentorship and the friendship really was clear. It was potent. Right. We talked all night, dropped him off at his hotel. And so then that preceded a series of Zoom calls and that invitation into the islands. And so it was fun for anybody listening. Whatever you want to create in the world, it's like, just do it and make the invitations even to those that you don't know. Right. Because you never know who will say yes, and how that changed our life.
Right. Yeah. So I was sitting here thinking, you're here in the United States, and I was just wondering, you both have traveled extensively internationally. So what have you learned from an international presence of anything that they do that you might bring back or have brought back here in your mindset?
Well, like where the real estate piece, interestingly enough, really came through, and what I feel like had a major impact on my worldview was living in Ahmedabad, India, where Gandhi was from, and working on a project related to cultural heritage. And we were living in an old 500-year-old home with a multi-generational family. So that was incredible to see how grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and the grandchildren were living together. And then that home itself also was a sustainable, massive house with this Arabic architecture. So there's rainwater capture in limestone caves underneath. There was natural ventilation for heating and cooling. There was the central courtyard where it was like a square with an opening in the center, and all the wind would swirl up through and cool everything down, and then it would swirl down at night and cool everything down. And so we got
multi-generational.
Yeah, so it hit what the themes of regenerative real estate are. It's like you're living in community. There is a sustainable design pattern to it, where the energy systems are giving back more than they take. Same with the water systems. It was beautiful. It was full of art and intricate paintings and woodwork. Ecologically, Old Town Ahmedabad was narrow streets, cows coming through. So it's not like we were surrounded by trees and open space. But what they had from an ecological standpoint was, of course, a small garden in the front, container gardens. But they had these sculptures called chabutras, which were places for the birds to come. And so the community was responsible for caring for the bird life. So they would put food out and water out. And then, of course, spiritually, everyone is like practicing puja at some moment of the day. So you can't turn a corner without someone celebrating basically being alive. So I think Ahmedabad was so important, and I'm so grateful for that time because it was such deep, meaningful living, and it forever changed how I lived. And I knew that one day we needed to live multi-generationally and like bring us back, because the nuclear family also being one of those questions of and answers of separation. We have to go spend all this money to live alone. Dad, mom will be over here. We'll be over here. Our siblings are over here. And collectively, we've spent millions of dollars to live separately, but yet we're spending all this money to travel back and forth to each other. I mean, it's just an inordinate amount of financial waste in some ways. And so and it took us years of kind of culture creating conversations in our own family to introduce this and say, let's do this. And so family come and lives here in the summertime, and we're able to do that. And the other thing too, if you want to share about Abhay Mangaldas, his commercial real estate was preserving these old homes. And they had an old family estate that they turned into a boutique hotel. And so all commercial retail on the bottom was for the artists. And then they had places for people to stay, and then, restaurants on the top. And he was painstakingly going through and like painting his painting crew was like, because that architecture there is so detailed.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just felt like there was a culture of care and awareness that just did not exist in the United States.
It does not. And what I was thinking of when you were telling me that is I worked with a guy from India for a project in Dallas, Fort Worth. And he told me that when he and his wife met in college in the United States, their goal was to buy a McMansion in Texas and bring his parents over. And so they both got great jobs. They worked 10 years. They got a McMansion. They brought his parents over. And within 2 years, his parents went back to India. That's what they said. There was no community. The mom would go outside during the day. It's a master plan development. Nobody's outside. And also because Walmart would not negotiate on prices. My mom would go up and say, this is $5.99. I'll give you $3.99. He goes, you can't do that here.
It's funny. I mean, I grew up in the South, and I know those communities so well. You you drive in from your workplace, and you click your garage door opener, and the garage opens up, you pull in, you go right into the kitchen.
Yes.
And then you shut it, and you can never, like, the spontaneous resident interaction doesn't take place. It's not designed for that. And this is why even the U.S. Surgeon General a couple of years ago came out with a book on the epidemic of loneliness.
Absolutely.
And how that's affecting everybody from seniors to our young kids right now.
Well, also because of capitalism, the independence, you need to make it on your own. Everything's on your own. Mike is an only child, and he grew up in a small community in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, where he knew everybody. There were 300 people at our wedding, and only 40 of them I knew because it was a small community. However, 3 days before we got married, his dad said to him, you're now going to be a married man. Do not ask me for anything. And you need to go out on your own. And I don't want you to live by us because you need to go make it on your own. Mike was devastated. It was almost like if I would have known that, I probably wouldn't got married yet. And so we went away. We went to Houston, and they never wanted to live right by us because we needed to be so independent. I mean, that was really stamped on his dad's brain, is to be independent. But what that causes is separation of families being here and there and everywhere and not really knowing their cousins and their aunts and uncles and all those types of things that having family near and community help with. Yeah.
I mean, this is something that's going to take multiple generations to reconnect. Totally. And I don't know what that looks like, but we love being a part of that conversation with folks within the regenerative real estate movement. How we practice it at Latitude is from a single family home all the way up to Neal's involved in neighborhood development and more whole communities. It still is a question of, what are the gifts that you have to help your neighbors, your family members in times of need? And how do we come back together? Because the shared work in community helps with taking care of our land and the ecology. And so it's like people working together in a culture of care is ultimately what regeneration is to me. And that creates the conditions for people giving back more than they take.
Well, I was thinking about what you said before about if you really want something, you go after it and do it. And one of the things is we moved here during COVID as well. And so I really did give the whole area at least 2 years to start being friendly and all that type of thing. But I literally live on a street that I've never been in one single house on that block. And everyone's nice and waves at me, but they just don't have any interest. So I really do think it's going to be generations to come to do that. And also, I guess it's because they're retired and older people have their own friends already. Because it's not like they don't have any friends and they need another friend. But I like how that you guys are open to everybody who wants to gather for community and help with community.
Absolutely.
It's really pronounced because we have a young child who's 9, and Raising a child is certainly a community act, I think, as is, I've come to learn, doing agriculture. Agriculture is not a solo endeavor. It has to be a community act, from access to land, to tools, to actually a lot of knowledge that needs to get passed down. So yeah, and this is why I go back to, like, there's a chasm right now in the real estate world that whenever you want to talk about these values around sustainability, our peers, they go towards decarbonization and solar panels and energy efficiency. All amazing things. Right. Don't get me wrong, the industry is going to be going there no matter what. We've had to embed it within our work, but there's not a lot of people that are talking about community and resilience and thriving and abundance and multi-generational living. So it's really trying to take a holistic lens and weave a lot of themes together that don't explicitly come together when people are at these really interesting chapter marks in their life around we need to move or we need to buy a new place, and really going through this imaginative and generative process of how do we align that vision with what your life wants to look like, with a very large financial decision, and being the catalyst to help enable people to get to where they want to go.
So I'm curious what the 5 roots of regenerative real estate, what are the 5 roots?
So the 5 roots of regenerative real estate it's our guiding framework. So anytime we are working with clients up to master plan communities, it's a way to ground in the work. So health and wellness. And health and wellness can go in a couple different directions, but ultimately it's about the quality of the materials we're surrounding ourselves with and the life cycle of those materials, indoor air quality. Of course, we get very excited about natural building materials or bio-based materials, and hoping that our homes, our built environment, supports our biology and our health and well-being rather than making us sicker.
Right.
Light, biophilic design. These are all things that could be thought about as a home is designed or as a home is retrofitted. And there's sustainability, which is like our closed loop systems of energy and water, particularly. So solar panels might come into that, the type of insulation, so we're not leaking energy. Then there's community. And this is the most subjective one of all the roots because it's how we are and how we behave and how we choose to be. But going back to what I said a couple minutes ago, I think a good question is, like, what kind of neighbor would you like to be? Or think about a time when you were in a situation where it wasn't necessarily your family, but you were in your neighborhood and things were going really well. Like, what were those elements that made for a good neighborhood? And then what were those things that didn't? So how do you bring that into your neighborhood? To be neighborly at minimum.
Right.
And then ecology is, our animals, our plants, the more than human world, and how are we tending to the life that doesn't necessarily have a human voice and creating space for them. And then the spirit, which is really celebrating the culture of place and that spirit of place, spirit of home, and having some reverence as we transition from the mundane world into the secret of our house. So sometimes that can be design features, right? We have in Japan, there's like torii gates. You can walk from the mundane into the sacred. So how do we demarcate special sacred places in our homes and on our land? So that way it's a sanctuary and not just a house.
And I think the operative word is framework on this.
Right.
And it's because the way that we practice real estate, the way that we cut our teeth is a very conventional way of people. They'll get on Zillow. It matches, okay, 3 bedrooms. It's in my price range. We're going to go see it. We've got 15 minutes to walk through with our agent. Now we're kind of pressured into, is this the one? We write a contract. We have a very fast due diligence feasibility period. And 30 days later, you own the house. And it's kind of dizzying, and it certainly doesn't always end up where you want it to be. And so we really do try to take that time to bring a more holistic perspective of that, as well as on the seller side. Whenever you put out a beacon of regenerative real estate, you get to work with incredible folks that, one, they've been turned off by real estate agents and that stigma for their entire life. But they have these living legacies, like their properties are phenomenal. And we really came at it of realizing that you can't even necessarily quantify. An appraiser is going to look at this. That's a 3-bedroom house, and I'm going to measure that. I'm going to appraise it according to the same 3-bedroom house down the road because they might have been built in the same era and have same square footage. But one is a sanctuary and the other one is just a commodity box. And so we really...
That's how I feel about my property, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten that before, where they're just pricing it at what the households for down the street. And I'm like, have you seen the things we've done? Well, it doesn't matter right now, unless you're going to sell it. You're going to sell it? No. Yeah. Okay.
Let's pause for a moment and take time for information about sponsoring Local Whidbey Podcast. Season 1 launched with a bang. I started with just over 2,000 unique listeners in my very first month, and it just kept growing. Over the course of the season, more than 9,000 people tuned in to hear real conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, farmers, musicians, nonprofit leaders, and everyday locals doing extraordinary things. And since the last week in January 2025, the website withmagsy.com pages have been opened more than 226,000 times. And get this, even during our summer hiatus, the podcast continued to draw new ears. And get this, even during our summer hiatus, the podcast continued to draw new ears. We averaged over 1,500 unique listeners each month without releasing a single new episode. I guess once a Whidbey Island fan, always a Whidbey Island fan. So now with season 2 in full swing, I've got one more exciting update. I'm officially opening the podcast up to sponsorships. If you're a local business or creative venture looking to connect with an audience that already loves Whidbey Island as much as you do, there's a shiny new sponsorship page on withmagsy.com. You'll find it under the podcast tab. Go take a peek. I must confess, I'm not a fan of loads of ads that go on forever in podcasts. So as not to be a hypocrite, I'm looking for businesses who want to get a message out that is helpful and interesting with my guidance and works well with this podcast. After much thought and being a communication strategist for over 25 years, I'm looking for sponsors who help the community thrive and can give me an ad content that is highly trackable because it strikes a chord or is highly helpful. Whether you've listened from the start or you're just now discovering this island storytelling series, I'm so glad you're here. If you're interested and want to have a chat, again, check out sponsorships under the podcast tab at withmagsy.com. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real area of opportunity where, in our lifetime, where the appraisers are, they will evolve because more and more people are making these quality improvements to their homes. I think, for example, those with chemical sensitivities and transitioning their homes into non-toxic spaces because it's a health issue. How do we quantify that? Well, it begins with the first home, and we sometimes have to educate appraisers along the way, or we have to push back on the appraisal that comes. And so these are kind of some of the nitty-gritties as you get into a transaction, where that's what we were finding in Portland. So anyway, appraisals. If anybody wants to talk about that.
I think in a lot of times what our special sauce is, how do we qualify this? Not just quantify it, but how do we actually tell the story of a place so that you can start to really showcase what's really special about this and find the right buyer.
So what do you look for in a regenerative property? Is it the land? Is it the structure? Is it the story? Or is it all three?
I think it's all three, but I love to approach it first from the story and really being able to sit down and understand what makes this place special and what has somebody done to it. I am a sucker for that story of transformation.
Yeah.
What is somebody, and maybe this is just, part of our backstory of finding these old buildings and breathing life into them. But I love a good before and after and taking something that needs some love, infusing TLC into it. And I think that's whenever property owners come to us and they're saying they need to make that transition, I want to sit down. I want to hear what really lights them up about the place and what are those stories? How do they raise their family here? Because we've actually seen firsthand people with extraordinary properties. There's this one guy in Portland that he had this immaculate permaculture garden that he and his wife spent 40 years building. She had unfortunately passed away, and the buyers came through within 2 weeks, ripped out every single plant and just put in sod.
That was like a really catalytic moment where I'm like, wrong buyer for this place. I mean, if we could have really helped that transition, because there was all this it was like a little productive 5,000 square foot lot, but it was a little messy this is as permaculture can be. It's just living, everything has its role. And so I felt really sad because, I think today to be a conscious and understanding neighbor and homeowner, you have to be realizing that we have more responsibility than just owning this house. From the commodity standpoint, it might be an investment and it's where wealth is built and equity. Again, the question of how do we give back more than we take? Right. And then when the next buyer comes in, how do they learn about what's been happening here so they can continue on with the work?
Our house was an Airbnb before we bought it. And when we bought it and started working on it, it didn't have any landscaping. And the neighbor said, I'm so glad someone moved in here to give this property the love it deserves.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I hope you like what we do. She says, anything will be better. And the house was in good shape. It wasn't that. It's just, there was just, weeds and mowed weeds. And because it was Airbnb, wasn't putting a lot of money into that. But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. So let's talk about land trust models and agri-hood concepts. So of course, you guys know I got this from just researching you guys. And so you might want to tell the listener what a trust model is and an agri-hood concept and what kinds of projects in this region meet that criteria.
Yeah, two different themes, a land trust and an agri-hood. I'm happy to go into the land trust. So land trust, there's two different types, really. There's an environmental and agricultural land trust. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it extinguishes the development rights of a property. So if you have 100 acres and you could build, let's call it 20 homes, a land trust will buy those development rights, pay the farmer, the landowner, and that land is put in permanent or into a conservation easement.
Okay.
And that's had a long history, some of it positive, some of it negative for, the benefit of just preserving view sheds and things like that. But now there's been this trend towards how do we create community land trusts so that we can create permanently affordable homes? Because in places like Whidbey Island, where we have very expensive homes, it can be one of those things of we need to throw some spaghetti at the wall to figure out how we create affordability. And so a community housing land trust is essentially an organization owned by the community, owns the land, but then somebody buys or rents the home on top of it. And it creates a way in which our teachers and shopkeepers and librarians and critically needed service workers can actually be on the island and afford to be here. And so that's just one model, and it's great to see that there are groups on the island that we've been a part of, and we certainly cheerlead and try to support through a program that we have where every commission that we earn, we take a portion of that to put into these really well-meaning organizations that are moving the needle forward of where we need to go to have a place that we all want to call home. On the other end of that, with that question, is agri-hoods. And so agri-hoods is emerged to be one kind of sleeve of a master plan community that I love, which is instead of designing homes around a golf course, and don't get me wrong, I grew up playing golf, how do we actually design homes around a working regenerative farm so that people have a relationship with the land and their food and farmers, and instead of looking out the window and seeing just whatever.
So you have a property off island that's being moved that way.
So what we do is we've created a separate company called Hamlet Capital. That's really meant because we see all these different communities they're emerging. They're trying to figure out how do you actually design them, and then how do you build them? Okay. And so our group comes in, we work through a consultative advisory around those best practices, and then we'll actually invest money into the planning part, going vertical with construction.
Okay.
So that's kind of the first group of its kind actually putting capital towards this type of community creation. And Latitude works really great with this because it's the sister company of how do we tell the story? How do we actually go find those buyers that are looking to live that kind of lifestyle in those kinds of communities? And so we're really building out a platform that people can effectively find the place that they want to call home.
So do you guys look into, you're talking about how expensive Whidbey Island is, into building an agri-hood that's actually for affordable family housing, for service and things like that, people who wouldn't normally be able to afford a home, but it would be great to live in an area like that.
So I think that is the real innovative work that we're putting our heads into right now, which is to say, look, how how do we actually work on a large enough scale so that we can have mixed home typologies that fit multi-generations and create a mixed approach for incomes and be able to really stitch in different themes and solutions like a community housing land trust or tax credits to make things more affordable, and work with our sub-developers that might specialize in affordable housing. Or, we're building that's what's called a missing middle. So you're designing smaller and more compact, maybe duplexes and triplexes, as well as your standalone single-family house.
Right.
Because I think that type of diversity is really what makes a whole community. It's not just, hey, let's go create a project full of affordable units. We've got kind of a checkered past in the U.S. history doing that. But if we can actually blend that in so that it's not just, people of more means live over there and the people that don't live over
here. In the South, they call it on the other side of the tracks.
Exactly. That's really one of the things that I love about doing this kind of work and putting in that kind of planning, is being able to create those multidisciplinary outcomes that we're really hoping.
Right. So I saw in researching you guys have regenerative real estate gatherings. So what are those and how do those come about?
Alissa, that's how they come about.
Thank you, Alissa. Yeah. So we knew that when regenerative real estate was forming, that even though we might have been, the early ones to put the words together, we needed to meet the others and see who else cared. So we haven't had a gathering in a couple of years, but there was a period there between 2021 and 2023, 3 years in a row, where we invited folks out specifically to this amazing regenerative development example in Saco, Maine. It's called the Ecology School. The executive director there, Drew Dumpsch, he's also an amazing developer at the end of the day who really had a vision of bringing forward what's called Living Building Challenge buildings. Right. So he built a dormitory that was certified as a living building, as well as like the commons where the kitchen and the gathering space was. And we wanted to go know and feel and see what, those places were like. Well, in addition, it was on a 305-acre farm, former equestrian farm, turned into a farm and like a place for children. Like all of Maine's children can go stay there, kind of like Island Wood on Bainbridge that we have. It's like that here in Washington. You can go jump in the river, go to the farm, and just have this really expansive experience. So we were just calling everybody in, and the folks who were showing up really showed that even though we started out as realtors, holding this idea that this would be, something that would, go through Main Street and everybody was going to adopt regenerative real estate. Yeah. We were very idealistic at that time, but it was architects, developers, investors, nonprofit leaders coming to that table. And so we knew that we were, onto something bigger, because it wasn't just the realtor community. It was like, the professionals of our country working on these complex challenges of affordability and getting toxins out of the system, and how do we fund it. So our gatherings were, and when we have another one, are so fun, because we not only facilitate where everyone comes and brings their questions and we put them up on the wall, and then that's the topics. Those are the topics that we discuss. It's not necessarily like, super top down, but it's really, what do you want to learn about? And then we have ecstatic dance. We do a biodynamic stir and spray, which is an agricultural practice. And sometimes we have like silent walks down. We walk in silence down to the river and contemplate, our purpose and life. So we get a mixture of embodied experiences and intellectual.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, and so I think that when we can dance with each other, or when we can stir a preparation, which is an offering of fertility to the land, most of these folks who are transacting land have never done that.
Right. I bet they haven't.
And so it's mind-blowing for them. Right. And they walk away being like, oh my God, is that what this is? And I'm like, yes, this is what this is. Like, we have to practice what we preach. And so it's just a way to get people out of their heads and into their bodies, and then hopefully that can show up in their work. So
have you had any local collaborations into what you guys are doing, or what are your future hopes on Whidbey Island?
Yeah, we can't wait to collaborate on Whidbey. We have been doing it in subtle ways. Of course, moving here, it took a little while, right, to get to know the community. and find where our place is. And we would love to host a regenerative real estate gathering here, because folks from all over the country will come, and it's just an amazing quality of conversation.
It's a great place to come too.
And it's a great place to come. This is, takes a lot of effort, of course, as you know, hosting folks, and so the timing will come again. And I think an area that I've really been exploring on the side is volunteering at my son's school and seeing what the needs are of Whidbey before we ever say what we think Whidbey needs.
What are some of your roadblocks, though, to the traditional real estate market?
I'll answer that one. I think Whidbey is in a really interesting point in time in which it's very easy for the community conversation to talk about the problems that we have. And what I'm really hoping that we can do is we can get over this hump and start asking a different question of what's the problems to what do we want to create on this island.
Yeah.
And if we can get into that space and realize that that approach will naturally organize itself into addressing some of these deep systemic issues that are real problems that we do face, then I think we can start to actually move the needle forward. But until then, we just kind of get stuck in this siloed approach.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's working.
Right.
And we've really had to take a different tact. I mean, our work takes us into different communities across the world right now. And as much as we want to show up and be here doing this locally always, we're having to take something out of Penny Livingston, kind of world-renowned permaculturalist that lives on the island. She said, I go where I'm invited.
Okay.
And I think I've gotten to the point where I said, I'm going to go where I'm invited on the island right now.
Yeah.
And if that is helping somebody transact home, or to create their multi-generational village with whoever wants to come together, or if it's creating an agri-hood. I'm here for that. But at the same time, I'm not going to be the one that's saying, come hell or high water.
Yes.
Let's go do this. Because you have to do it.
You can't, or you wouldn't have a business.
No, you don't have a business, and there's a lot of kind of subtle powers that be that the will has to be there amongst a lot of different stakeholders.
That's true. That's very true. So tell the listener about your podcast, Latitude.
So we have a podcast called the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast that has been a labor of love and so fun for me to host. Really,
Where did I get Latitude?
Well, Latitude is the name of the company.
Okay.
And I host the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. And we're just really fortunate. Some of the best and brightest and most innovative minds across the world have been featured in interviews like this. And it's been just an amazing exploration into what kind of world is actually not just theoretical, but possible, because people are doing it in their own communities. And out of that has come just this wellspring of a network of amazing folks that show up. And some will roll through saying, I've been listening to your podcast for years, and I'm in Seattle. Can I come to your homestead and hang out?
Yeah.
And then others, it opens up doors to be able to actually talk to policymakers and very large investment groups and families that are trying to seed a regenerative future.
Yeah. So my last question before we do some rapid fire fun questions is, if there was one community project here on the island, what would it be?
Just one.
Yes. Because it can't be more than an hour. Just kidding.
Gosh, I mean, there's so many.
Where would you like to start?
There is an interesting property that it was a hospice property, and I think they're transitioning programming and potentially ownership there. And I think they're leaning towards an affordable housing project, but it's a large piece of land. I just look at that and I would love to continue with this theme around death and healing and hospice and regeneration, and incorporate housing and affordability into that. And farming, and I just think that all these themes work so beautifully together. And I really think that on a larger level, we have these acupuncture points on the island, from Oak Harbor to Coopville to Freeland, all the way down to Bayview. And really, what's hard about Whidbey Island is that our commercial districts are spread out. So if you're at a shop in Langley, it's really hard to get up to Oak Harbor. And so we have this car-based phenomenon that undermines foot traffic and commercial viability.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help in places like Freeland. Well, from a development perspective, what happens is that we can't actually come to an agreement around how we want to create the infrastructure. So there are many amazing ideas that have been stymied by lack of sewer systems and the realities of septic. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of holding Whidbey back too, is just how do we create more of a there for these places so we're not developing just all over the place.
So I don't know if this was meant to be or not, but a couple of years ago, right after they opened up different places after COVID, I was in Langley at the coffee shop, and I think I told you guys this. I got one of the books because they have used books there, and I picked up Pocket Neighborhoods by Ross Chapin and bought it and went through that whole thing. That was the first time this kind of concept was introduced to me as someone who grew up in the suburbs, of Dallas, Texas. And I thought it was just the coolest concept. And of course it, came out of Oregon, somewhat.
Out of Langley, actually.
Oh,
the first Pocket Neighborhood is
that was the first one.
But he was in
Jim Stoles.
Worked with.
Yes.
For Alexander out of Oregon.
Yes, out of Oregon. That's where I was getting that from. Yeah.
But then U of O really picked up.
Well, right? they did the Oregon Experiment, which is a book.
Right.
But Christopher Alexander came out of Berkeley.
So, listener, if you want to pick up that book, it's on the internet. It's very interesting, and it gives you a visual concept of what they're talking about as far as community. And I would love to see when someone is creating a master plan development, do it like that. I mean, it's great. And it keeps people from what you said at the beginning, opening the garage door and shutting in and never coming out. Yes. So let's do some fun little rapid fire questions. So sunrise or sunset on Whidbey? What's your favorite?
Sunset.
Sunrise.
Like to get up with the chickens and see the
I used to do more trail running, and I always felt like when I was running with the sunrise and seeing the day come that I just had a better day.
Yeah. So what is your go-to comfort food after a log project day, or maybe working out here, of what you haven't eaten off the vine while you were working? You have y'all don't have comfort food?
Well, I feel like I do.
I love a home-cooked meal.
I was about to say, being from Louisiana, you probably have quite a few comfort foods that you love.
I do. I was raised in a Cajun family. So it's just anything made with love at home, and just an amazing treat.
Well, I'll have to say, I'll give a good shout out to Aurora at Wildly Beloved Pasta. It's like pick up some fresh pasta, put a bunch of olive oil on it, fresh sea salt, and Parmesan cheese. And I happen to have, of course, basil and parsley growing, so put that on there. And like that could probably sustain me every day for the rest of my life, and is comforting.
It is. It is. Okay, so first thing you notice when walking onto your new property?
Well, a huge water tower.
Yeah.
Onto our property or a new property?
Well, I meant your new property when you first moved here, but the water. But you know what? When I wrote that question, I didn't know that was there.
Well, when we first walked onto this place, it was just overrun with blackberry bushes, and it felt strangled. And I was like, we're ready to rip those blackberry bushes out and go.
Yeah. So beside your own property, do you have a favorite spot on Whidbey Island you guys like to go?
Yes. I shout out to the Whidbey Institute Woodland Sanctuary and the trails. So I have just a complete love affair with dropping my son off at school, taking a walk through the trails. If the Woodland Sanctuary is empty, just going and sitting in there. And that's a Ross Chapin build. Well, he designed it, and then it was built by Kim Holting. But it's so special in there. And so that would be like my favorite place from a built environment standpoint. But then I just have to say Max Welton, just around the bend, walk all the way down to the end of the beach.
Yeah.
But
So wood stove or heated floors?
Wood stove.
Absolutely.
I think I knew that. Secret skill one of you has that the other one doesn't.
Alyssa has this, what I'd love to call lady intuition.
Lady intuition?
I usually just kind of check in with her. What's your intuition saying about this?
Yeah. I think are more intuitive than men are. I know that's a general statement, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Secret skill though. But see, Neal is like, it's maybe not a skill, more as just a way. He is so calm under duress or challenge. And I admire that in him and strive to build that practice in my life. And I would say it is a skill and it is a way of being at the same time. And you're just so steady Eddie, and it's helpful because in real estate things aren't always steady Eddie, and you need really confident, calm people to get from point A to point B.
Well, if we're being serious here, then I mean, what I do look at you, like we've lived across the world, and Alissa has a way of really breaking down barriers, and I think it's her smile. And what I learned early on is that Alissa has never met a stranger. I mean, she was a student caller at the U of O, raising money from past alumni, and she used to get in trouble for talking too long on the phone to people.
Of course. Like, you were here in 1948. Tell me all about it. Okay, wait. What about your $2,000 gift? Do you want to renew that?
That's why we were talking in the first place. I do stuff like that too. Right. I call myself a yacker. And I always say it's because I'm from the South and everybody down there yaks. Yeah.
My
but you're not.
She would say, well, Alissa could talk on the wrong number for 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, so one word to describe your design aesthetic. And you can have different ones, but
natural.
Wabi-sabi. I would try it.
Wasabi?
Yeah, wasabi.
Yeah, wabi-sabi. That is a Japanese term, though. And you want to explain?
Yeah, I mean, it's not overly neat. It doesn't have to be precise, but it has to fit.
Right.
It doesn't always have to be that perfect piece that came from out of the designer magazine.
Right.
And that's more of our aesthetic.
Yeah, it just fits.
Yeah.
Your life. I always tell my sons that every 10 years of your life, you'll change a little bit. You won't be the same person, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. And that goes with design aesthetic as well. I don't do anything now that I did the first 10 years we were married.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know about anything. I didn't know and I didn't grow up with anybody or friends that had interior designers or decorators. And I didn't know that till you get married, you buy your first home, and you start buying design magazines. And you're like, what's interior design? Why did I major in technology? I would have done that.
Neal, he's like really wanted to like design restaurants.
Yeah.
He's like, how did I not know about restaurants?
I thought that'd be so fun. Was it so creative? You get to design these spaces that have themes.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. I'm going to go way back to the beginning of this conversation. Being from Louisiana, how did you know about the school where you guys met? How did you know about that and go all the way up there?
Oh, gosh. I mean, at 21, I put Louisiana in my rearview mirror.
Okay.
So maybe I'll come back to this place, but I'm not sure if I want to actually live in the shadow of the petrochemical industry. My entry card, which was a great way to do it quite affordably, was to join the Peace Corps instead of going to law school. And I found this kind of crazy liberal arts school that was really into, at the time, sustainable development, which is what my master's degree was in. And it was founded by returned Peace Corps volunteers. And I loved that. And it was probably one of the most rigorous academic settings that I've ever been in. But it had this kind of like crunchy veneer around it.
Yeah.
I fit right in.
Yeah, I forgot to ask that, and I was curious the whole time, how...
And then how did he marry a woman from Alaska originally, not on the I-10?
Yeah. Well, how did you know about that school?
Yeah, another job I had during undergraduate studies was in the study abroad program. I had come back.
Northeast United States is studying abroad.
Well, I had come back from studying abroad. I lived in Japan for a year. And then so that subsequent year, I was giving counsel to the younger freshmen and sophomores as they were planning for their junior year abroad. And I discovered SIT Study Abroad. So we were at SIT Graduate Institute. And SIT Study Abroad took students to amazing places that were off the beaten path, like Tajikistan or Ghana, Vietnam. And I just started going deeper into their whole academic approach. And they were originally founded out of post-World War I for the experiment in international living, which was high school children going and living abroad for a year to create world peace through cross-cultural exchange. So it has deep roots in really wanting to bring peace about, and then it transitioned into college study abroad. And then the graduate school came out of Peace Corps volunteers. So just a really interesting history of, obviously, people really loving humanity and wanting to leave it better than they too found it and solve the world's greatest problems.
That's great.
Yeah.
So before we wrap this up, I know that you guys in regenerative real estate, like Neal said, it's all over the world, all over the United States. But would you have a particular vision? Have you ever thought about having a particular vision for Whidbey Island?
Whidbey already practices so much of this kind of alchemy that it takes, real leaders to bring something together. It's got an amazing agrarian culture to it. And so I think in a lot of ways, Whidbey is it's going through its own journey, and it can definitely be in integrity with that. And I think everywhere, it doesn't matter if it's Whidbey or if it's Dallas or Detroit, like every single place is on its own path towards creating vibrant living spaces and meaningful community. So I don't think it's necessarily just for Whidbey, but it's more like, how do we start to change the culture of a transactional oriented approach?
Yeah.
And I want to see that just as much here as everywhere.
I will say, from doing this podcast and also doing my supper club, I have met a lot of people that are very like-minded in their own thing with what you're saying and what I'm saying about not trying to change the island, but to progress and make it better. There's a lot of young people, middle-aged people, my age people that have a lot of ideas and are working really hard to do that.
I think if I was going to articulate a vision, I really am thinking about the children a lot and young people, and it is creating the conditions for young people to be able to live here and raise their families here. And I know that gets into affordability. So ultimately it is recognizing that a whole community has everybody from all ages, and it does take quite amount of financial resources, as we know, to be able to move here and make it. So I just really would like to see more business incubation and entrepreneurial spirit for our young people to be able to stay. And I think that the call then to property owners who are creative and want to see this too, I think that's the question is how can your land be in support of whether it's future housing or business incubation or access to land, to be creative in that way and reach down through the generations, because they really need us right now. They need us so much.
I was very impressed when I interviewed Hi from Willask. I mean, she moves here, and within a year she's like, I'm walking around my house in my pajamas, I need to do something, and puts that together, and it's just growing. It's successfully.
We're so happy her children go to the Waldorf school with my son, and what she is providing for families is so important. And so very thankful for young, talented people in their late 30s to 40s who I know moved during the COVID times to bring that energy to the island. And now I think it's saying, okay, as the generation passes the baton, the older generation is passing the baton to us. How can we work together?
Right.
Yeah. So Neal and I love those conversations, especially as it relates to home and place and legacy planning and strategy around it. So that way it can be in service to the future.
That's right. Well, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed it. Hope you did too.
Yeah, we loved it.
All right.
Thanks for being here. It's so fun to do this in person.
I know, right? Thank you.